debt for all the electricity I'll ever consume? No. I've committed, by subscribing to the system, to paying for the electricity as I've consumed of it. And under mathematically perfected economy, we monetize the consumption so that the electric power company can be rewarded for it, can afford to produce it, and so on and so forth. The thing is, these people who are reacting to debt are simply saying that one thing or another thing or another thing is debt, and all other obligations are debt as well. Well, that's not true at all. But as we prove in these forums where these people who assert that money cannot be a debt, unless the life cycle of the tokenization parallels the life cycle of whatever property it by intention would represent, then and thus if unless it has an obligation attached to it to pay for consumption at the rate of consumption, we have inflation. So there's no such thing as spending money into circulation without inflation, unless you attach an obligation to the circulation, which is no more than to pay for it as you consume of it, which is the only right thing to do. What are we trying to do by creating what we call an economy? Are we trying to create a license to be rewarded without production? Absolutely not. That's not an object of it at all. So therefore, we've reduced issues to exactly what they have to be in mathematically perfected economy, and the reason that the promissory obligation is the only vehicle for tokenizing wealth have been made perfectly clear by this. I mean, you might have to listen to it a few times before you understand it, but it's the only thing which makes the, as Jack said to me the other day, which makes the equation work. It's the obligation to pay for things as you consume of them is an unavoidable obligation in a just economy. Otherwise, we would have a class of consumers who don't produce likewise, and that's not something we desire to have at all, you see.
Mike, can I just go over that again then with maybe a real-world example, so to speak? Because, I mean, a lot of people are going to be listening to this. A lot of people are going to have to try and figure out how this mathematically perfected economy is going to work in the real world. Now, I mean, you're putting across plenty of examples. So let's try doing something in such a way that listeners can maybe understand how it would work in their life. So let's just flick, maybe next year, let's hope, to mathematically perfected economy running throughout the system. So, I mean, is there a reason for us to be working 40 hours a week, for instance? How much are we going to be paid for doing that? And if there is a reduction in production, because of course we don't need to produce quite so much, because hopefully we're producing quality goods that last 2 and 3 times longer than the current ones anyway. I mean, this is partially what would happen, and how would we then purchase items? I mean, obviously you've mentioned you could be saving, you could work and you could save and just pay outright cash for any purchase that you had, whereas now you can't, because there's just no way of saving. You have to go into debt pretty much to buy anything. So how would this work for, you know, a real man, real woman next year when mathematically perfected economy? What would be the scenario that you could think of as explainable and as understandable as maybe you could make it to the average person?
We can make a number of examples, for which cover the bases. I mean, we just put people in as if they're mathematic variables, which they in truth are in a true economy. What we have is a way of monetizing all production and desirable prosperity. which reduces our issues to, if we don't want someone to do something, we prevent them from doing it, and by regular legal channels or other channels of influence. But we don't do it by penalizing them, by imposing improprieties on an economy or whatever like that. Mathematically perfected economy is an eradication of all irrelevant issues, and it's a way to monetize prosperity, all the desirable prosperity that we're capable and willing to deliver to ourselves. So we can take, let's just take a typical example, a family. They are, whatever their salary is, it's all absorbed in servicing their own private debts. And the government, under a lie of fiscal austerity, is discussing enforcing payment on its ever more ominous deficits, which are a further extension of this obfuscation of the currency. That alone is threatening terminal monetary consequences upon them. Furthermore, this artificial multiplication of artificial indebtedness is jeopardizing their employers. It's jeopardizing their jobs. In other words, it's forcing the costs of all things upward. And so as their jeopardized employer cannot afford to pay them commensurably or to increase even its own charges for its own production to a market strapped by the same factors. The industry is possibly going down while prices are going up. They're not going up enough for industry to meet margins of solubility. Everybody is marginalized to a critical extent, where in this what's often called a house of cards, the first card to go down affects immediately adjacent sectors, and the whole thing comes down, like the proverbial house of cards. So this family is living under a great deal of stress, artificial stress. And let's put some real numbers on this. Let's just say the husband and the wife both work, and together their salaries are $5,000 a month, and let's say $2,500 of that is dedicated to their mortgage, and it's actually $35,000 home built in 1963, but they bought it, let's just say 5 years ago for $350,000, and the rest of their earnings are dedicated to car payments, marginal health care, food, the necessities of life. They can't afford to have hobbies such as sailing or hunting or whatever. Their spare hours are spent vegetating and wishing they weren't, and wishing things were better, but eventually succumbing to the television being the full satisfaction of every spare hour of their life. Well, in a transformation to mathematically perfected economy, what we're concerned with accomplishing seems at first thought to be a distant difficult to achieve object. That is, what we really want to do is restore the state of affairs to what it would have been if we had enjoyed the benefits of mathematically perfected economy all our lives. Now, of course, it's impractical to say that, well, we would have had toys that we could never have afforded, so let's buy ourselves all these toys. Well, this transformation is about nothing impractical. It concerns the things we have, because the moment we involve impracticality or impractical objects in our need to transform, we interject all kinds of issues which are further divisive. And as I see it, it would be trivial for us to insist on, restoring certain details. Nonetheless, what we do have to deal with are the things that we do have, and we have achieved under this obfuscation of the currency. And how do we rectify the resultant state of affairs relative to those things? That's the scope of this transformation. So this transformation affects these people in regard to what they have succeeded in engaging in doing under this lie of economy which has been imposed upon us. And the first thing that it would do, it would take this $350,000 home that they've built, which was actually a $35,000 home built in 1963. Now, how would it rectify their situation in regard to their mortgage? That home, it's 2010, so 1963 was, 47 years ago. And is that right? Yeah. So let's just call that 50 years of consumption of a 100-year lifespan, just to speak in round numbers. And let's just say that in today's dollars, to have built that house would cost, and let's use a round number, it probably works out to a little higher than this. Let's just say, let's just make it $150,000. Well, we do two things. We're going to refinance that home under mathematically perfected economy, counting all prior payments of interest instead toward principal. But before we do that, we're going to evaluate a fork of logic, which is only right. If the house was, the cost of the house, which was financed under the present imposed system, exceeds the cost of producing it under the present system, instead of considering $350,000 to be the original principal of the debt which was assumed, we're going to consider it to be the $150,000, which reflects the cost of producing the house in today's dollar, and we're going to refinance that under mathematically perfected economy, which is to arrive at a state where half of its 100-year lifespan remains. And so in doing this, we are counting all of their payments of interest instead toward $150,000 principal instead of